Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with the Witherslack Group, experts in special education and care. Enjoy the podcast.
Live from an attic somewhere in the north, this is The Late Show with Tom Starkey.
Good evening. So tonight we are going to be talking about accessibility issues in digital learning. This show may also be called I Cannot Stand PDFs, and I've got an hour and a half to tell you why. So if you're into that kind of thing, please stick with me. We're going to have a very, very interesting evening talking about tech, accessibility, disability, assistive technology, and all that good stuff.
Live from an attic somewhere in the north, this is The Late Show with Tom Starkey. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Forgot to turn my mic off on the intro there, and I just ended up coughing. It doesn't really fit in with the whole kind of bombastic, hey, let's do this. There's me going, sorry. So I've got to remember to do that next time. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me on this Sunday evening. I'm here in the attic in Leeds. It's freezing cold. I've got 2 jumpers on. But what I'd like to talk to you tonight is I'd like to talk to you a little bit about assistive technology, disability, accessibility, and digital learning. Digital learning is what we're going to be on about today, everybody. Digital learning has become massive the last few years due to their pandemic thing, but also the build up to the pandemic. It was the buzzword, digital learning. We've got to make sure digital learning is happening. We've got to make sure that learning is digital. If it's not digital, we've got to digitize the not digital learning, make sure it's all good. But I want to take a step back. I'm doing one of those things in these shows where I'm combining my day job with my stint here on Teach Talk Radio. It's been a really, really good day on the shows. We've had some fantastic people calling in, and I'm here to just kind of lessen the average, as it were. So we're going to be talking about accessibility issues in digital learning. If you have any comments, please, you can always put your tuppence worth on Twitter at TT Radio 2022. I'm still on my kind of social media fast. I'll be off social media for a year until I get a book written. People say like, oh, is it going to be a book about education? No, it's not. I've written everything I possibly can about education. There's only so much you can say, and then it just turns into kind of repetitive ranting. Now, I'm all for repetitive ranting. I quite like doing that, in general. But it's not really something that a lot of people want to read. No. It's going to be a different kind of book. But anyway, that's my own business. And accessibility when it comes to digital learning is everybody's business. Usually I have a little section in every show where I talk about assistive technology. I talk about, this is the assistive technology bit. Digital learning, disability, equality. This is the whole show today. This is my house now. My day job is assistive technology advisor for a higher education institution. And so I am combining these two things, my day job, my evening stint on the radio, because I got to get a lot off my chest tonight. Not that I'm using this as a personal therapy, but I'm basically using this as a personal therapy. So we're going to be talking about accessibility issues in digital learning. We're going to be talking about what some of the most common barriers are when it comes to accessibility. And when we're talking about digital learning, we're talking about anything that it doesn't necessarily have to be learning materials. It can be like forward-facing material that your school, your university, your college, whatever has. What does it look like? Can it be accessed by everyone? Can it be accessed by everyone, including people with disabilities? So that's the focus tonight. Please ring in if you want to. The lines, I don't know if there's lines or one line or half a line, but the lines are open for tonight. We're allowed to talk this evening. Please come in and have your say. I'm not going about this in a particularly mannered or a particularly kind of balanced way. My job is to help students to access their learning through different assistive technologies, whether that be screen readers, whether that be screen adaptation technology, whether it be the use of audio recorders in lectures and seminars, and then transcription software to help get those ideas down somewhere. So this is from a personal place, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. This is a personal place for me because it's my bread and butter. It's what I do on a day-to-day basis, and hopefully, feedback-wise, I do it all right. I'm not the best in the world at anything, apart from maybe drinking copious amounts of coffee after 8 p.m. when I'm trying to talk to people. But yeah, I said in the intro, this might well end up being an hour and a half of me ranting about PDFs. So that's where we're going to start. We're not going to do Tom. In fact, we will. We will. Hang on. Here we go. Here's the first one. No, Tom's tech tips aren't working. Ironic indeed. But here's the first one. This is all Tom's tech tips, but this is not really Tom's tech tips. This is Tom's kind of fairly aggressive warnings on what you should be doing when it comes to accessibility of digital learning materials. So, what am I talking about? Well, there are barriers in digital learning. There's this idea that digital learning was, when the pandemic happened, when people had to stay at home, that it was a great leveler for disabled students. In many cases, it was, mobility issues around attending the same physical space wasn't such a barrier. Enabling yourself to get yourself to a particular place. Didn't need to do it. That was great. Students with chronic illness, could stay at home in a comfortable environment using the technology that they were familiar with. Fantastic. However, it wasn't the be all and end all of everything. There are certain challenges when it comes to digital learning. When it comes to, excuse me for a second, I'm just kind of messing around with my different programs and so on and so forth. I've got a lot of those little circles that go around and tell you that things aren't particularly working very well this evening. That is both on my screen and perhaps actually in my head. So there are lots of barriers still. Digital learning, remote learning, if you, or digital, or just digital products when it comes to education. It doesn't mean that it solves all the accessibility issues that disabled students and disabled staff have on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't. I mean, it'd be lovely if it did, but that's not the way the world works. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things. We're going to talk about the barriers. We're going to talk about the barriers. We're going to talk about some of the things that people come across when it comes to digital learning and some of the issues that they face. We're starting with PDFs. I don't care. I'm going in hard. PDFs. So PDFs. And all of this stuff that I'm going to be talking about tonight, this is derived from the WCAG guidelines that when it comes to digital information, forward-facing public institutions. The WCAG guidelines are in place to try and ensure that everybody can access digital material. Fantastic things. And if you haven't already had a look at some of the points that are in this, you don't have to be a technologist. You don't have to be an accessibility specialist. You just have to have a little bit of an interest into the ways that people access learning materials. And the WCAG guidelines. This is some of the stuff that I've derived from it, and these are some of the issues that I come across fairly regularly. Unfortunately, a bit too regularly for my liking. But anyway, we're going to start with PDFs. So, PDF stands for portable document format. In case you didn't know, in my line of work, it stands for pretty damn frustrating. PDFs are used to share documents. It was envisaged that they were used to lock down documents for archiving or for printing. And it's that lockdown nature of PDFs that is frustrating in regards to accessibility, because a PDF's only ever accessible as the kind of original that it's from. So if somebody has created that PDF with accessibility in mind, and when we talk about accessibility in PDFing, the verb PDFing that I've just created. When we talk about that kind of thing, basically what we're really talking about is accurate tagging. And I'll get onto that a little bit later on. I've got me big geeky glasses on tonight, so we're going to take a deep dive into certain things like tagging, like all sorts of different tech stuff that is useful and is really, really relevant when it comes to accessibility. So, PDFs, right? Can you hear the bile in my voice when I say those three little letters? PDFs are only ever accessible as the original document. So if the person who created the original document knows about accessibility and has ensured that the things in the PDF are accessible, then the PDF is going to be great. It's going to be able to access. And what we're talking about when we talk about tagging is, are the things in the PDF identified as to what they are? For instance, the title, the heading, the subheading, and so on and so forth. If that hasn't happened, then when it comes to perhaps using a screen reader, if you can in fact use a screen reader, some PDFs are so locked down that they don't allow the use of any assistive technology. However, Adobe has its own screen reader, and there's third-party screen readers, third-party text-to-speech programs. Those two aren't the same thing, but we'll make that's for a different time. So the PDF's only ever accessible as it was when it was created, and if there hasn't been that thought in accessibility right at the beginning, then PDFs can be a nightmare when it comes to the use of assistive technology with documentation. So when we talk about an accessible PDF, what we're really talking about is we're talking about a correctly tagged PDF, which means, and when we're talking about tagging, think about it like this. It means that the document is divided up into kind of logical, navigatable chunks, and the navigation is really important. It's basically a labeling system that tells assistive technology like a screen reader, this is the heading, this is the subheading, these are bullet points, this is an image, that image has a description of alt text on it. And if those things are there, that's great. PDFs inherently aren't inaccessible or accessible. However, what they are, unfortunately, is incredibly locked down sometimes. So here's a tip, all right? If you have a PDF, if you say your school VLC is sharing information to parents, carers, other stakeholders, if you have a PDF, check that it's tagged, and you can do that in Adobe and you can do that in other programs. So there's a little checkbox and it says tagged, yes or no. If it is, great, then you have to check whether that tagging is accurate or not. And the reason you do this, imagine you were given a document and then that document was in no particular order whatsoever. If a PDF isn't tagged properly, that's what it's like when you're using a screen reader. Or, in fact, if you're using keyboard input. Many of my students have mobility issues, which mean that navigating a document, they can only use a keyboard. And so tagging allows a logical sequence, allows you to use a keyboard to navigate, allows you to use a screen reader to orientate yourself in the page, in the geography of the screen. And I think I've talked about that a little bit before. So if you are going to use a PDF, please, and if you have the choice of creating a PDF, take some time to tag the PDF. And if you don't know what that means, Google it. Google it. If you want to try and get this information to every member of your school community, your entire community, you have to take the time to do that. Or, and here's another way, offer an alternative format. Don't just offer PDF on its own. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't offer a PDF on its own. Offer a PDF, offer a Word document format. Sometimes when it comes to assistive technology, Word is a little bit friendlier. Put it on an HTML page. HTML is like a soothing balm of assistive technology friendliness after a graze of PDFs. So if you're going to share information and you're sharing information through PDF, offer another format, offer an alternative format, and Bob's your uncle. Sorry, I've got kind of beeps and my CD drive's going absolutely mental. Like I've used that in the last 3-4 years. Anyway, all right. So PDFs, bleh. But if you have to use them, tag them, or if you have to use them, don't just use them on their own. Have an alternative file format that can also be shared. So speaking of alternative file formats and documentation, let's have a look at within the documentation. So you have a Word document, you maybe have a PDF, maybe you have a hyperlink in that PDF. You press on that hyperlink, it takes you on a journey through the interweb to get you somewhere else. Now, that's great, but when we talk about hyperlinks, some assistive technology, such as screen readers in this case, they read out the letters that make up the hyperlink. It doesn't recognize a hyperlink as a hyperlink in and of itself, and if it does, it still reads out exactly what's on the page for that hyperlink. So with that in mind, if you're creating a document and you have a hyperlink, right, what you need to do is you just describe what the link is. Don't have this kind of like a click here, okay? Because click here doesn't offer you any information when it comes to description. If you have click here, you have to then click onto a page that may not be immediately accessible, and you're struggling around. So when you have a hyperlink, when you're linking something, all right, use the edit hyperlink feature. If you're on a Word document, so right click, and then you've got a list of right click on the hyperlink, and then you can edit the description of that particular hyperlink. And in that description, instead of something like click here or something along the lines, just give a simple description of what the hyperlink is. Link to so-and-so document, or link to YouTube video, or so on and so forth. Just to give a heads up to people who may not have foresight, or may be using assistive technology that relies on the description of the words on the screen. Hopefully this stuff is a little bit useful. This is not me saying, well, a little bit is, but it's not fully me in this show saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. What I'm hoping to do with this particular show is just increase awareness a little bit of some of the things that students and staff have to go through, who are disabled, who use assistive technology. So, where were we? PDFs. They suck. Use another file format if you can, but make sure that a screen reader can read them properly with tags if you need to use those. Hyperlinks. Make sure you, in your hyperlink, edit the hyperlink with a description of what that hyperlink is. If you're using a hyperlink and you don't edit it at all, and you just leave it, and some of those hyperlinks to Zoom meetings or hyperlinks to Teams meetings, they go on forever. They go. It's like 100 random letters. Imagine if you're using a screen reader, you have to listen to all that kind of stuff, and it's like, what? Yes, it's a link. Great. What's it about? It's 04439. Nobody needs that. Nobody's got time for that. All right. So if you're using hyperlinks in documentation, edit the hyperlink with a description of what the hyperlink is. Easy win, guys. Easy peasy. Okay. Easy win. Doesn't take any time at all. So, right. So, talked a little bit about documentation. We're talking a little bit about the old pen and paper, the old quill and parchment. So, we're going to move to multimedia, and we're going to talk a little bit now about video content. Say your forward-facing website has video content within it. Now, Captioning is very important. Captioning is very important for students and staff, any stakeholder that wants to get all the information that you are sharing. So, ensure your videos are captioned. If you're unsure how to do that, or if you're worried about kind of the accuracy of captioning, there's a couple of things that you can do. I have to create a lot of videos, usually instructional tools, sometimes instructional tools explaining instructional tools in a kind of strange Inception thing. But if you are if you think, okay, oh gosh, the captioning video, you don't have to necessarily do the captioning by hand. There are many products out there that will auto caption for you, and then you can use that auto caption facility as a basis of your full of your full captioning system. So, for instance, Microsoft Stream auto captions video content. YouTube, if you upload to YouTube, you don't have to share it. You put it in private, it auto captions video content, and you can use that as a basis, and it saves you so much time to get captioning into your video. Really, really important. Really important. Because you create these fantastic medias. We want to share them with the community. We want to share them as widely as possible. But what you're doing if you don't caption your video is that you're taking away information from people, and that's not what you want to be doing. So yeah, Stream, Microsoft Stream, auto captions, YouTube auto captions. If you have podcasts, or if you have audio, you want to have the audio of poetry spoken by the poet, and you want to share that on your VLC, or you want to share any other kind of audio. Have a transcription. Have an alternative. It's about covering your bases. It's about having an alternative to all these things that you're sharing. Transcription, once again, much like captioning, audio transcription, there are tools out there that do it automatically. Word for the Web has a transcription feature where you can directly upload audio files in MP3 format or video files in MP4 to Word, and it will transcribe it for you with timestamps, with identification of different speakers. Otter AI, a third-party app that does a really, really good job of that kind of thing. Give people who don't necessarily have access to a particular way of doing things, give people alternatives. And that, I mean, this isn't just for disabled students either, or disabled staff. This is for a large percentage of people now use subtitles constantly when they're watching television. So this isn't all these tips, all these things about accessibility. It's not just for disabled people. It's best practice. It's best practice. Give people the chance to access the information, and do that by giving them options. If you have a video, have captioning. If you have a PDF, also include a Word version or an HTML page. These kind of things, just think a little bit wider. We're going to talk about one of the issues when it comes to accessibility and digital resources and digital learning, which is conceptualization of the other when it comes to development of these tools and development of these websites. But that's for the heavy kind of ending part of this particular show. So PDFs, they suck. Hyperlinks have a description of where they go. Caption your video content. You can do it for free on Stream. You can do it for free on YouTube. Can you see the pattern here? None of this stuff is kind of massively complicated. None of this stuff's going to take you hours. Don't get me wrong. This does take extra effort. Yeah. I think there's this thing. I've been in meetings with companies where I've given them information about some of the things that are inaccessible on their website, and they've seen this as a burden for developers. Cannot stand that mind view. Cannot stand it. It's absolutely ridiculous. But these things are, easy wins. They do take time. you do have to think about them. You do have to conceptualize people who don't necessarily use traditional ways of doing things when it comes to the digital world. But it should be part of your offer anyway. Schools, educational institutions, inclusivity is this thing that is hammered home all the time. But that's not just in ethos, it should be in practice. And inclusivity when it comes to digital material is incredibly important. So important, in fact, that it's enshrined in law. So if I'm not convincing you with all these things, just think about, what might happen if somebody gets wind that your digital learning materials aren't accessible. It's a bit mean, but I like having a little bit of the old stick with the carrot. A little bit of the old baseball bat with the cupcake. Anyway, right, we'll do one more, and then I'll put the news on if I can, because Tom's tech tips, the sound on that, the wheel is still running around. So we'll see what happens. I might need a little bit of a refresh of the browser, I think. Anyway, another one, back to documents. Okay, another easy one. It's already in place. It's already available. You don't need to go anywhere else to do it. When you're writing a document, all right, and it's back to that kind of tagging, identifying what's going on. Use the styles in Word. Use the styles that break down the different things on the screen into things like heading, title, heading, subheading. And if you've got a series of documents, a range of documents that you're trying to share, try to make them as consistent as possible. And that goes the same to all your digital materials, whether it be learning materials, whether it be information sharing, all that kind of stuff. Try and be as consistent in your formatting as you can. Now, the reason for that is that what that means, it means less cognitive load for somebody who is accessing this material. It means familiarity. Like your web pages, your documents, your on the VLC, all that kind of stuff. Consistency and familiarity and repetition. It's the starting point for ease of use. So when you are creating documents, have a style and use the style. The style's already there in Word, use them, because if you use a style, what that means is that the kind of tagging in Word is already there. You don't have to worry about, well, has this been kind of tagged as is. If you use the style, that happens automatically.
Okay, so we're back now. We're talking about accessibility of digital learning materials. It is difficult because there's always this kind of contradiction between kind of aesthetics and usability. Design's really fun. When you're designing these materials, it's a really fun thing to do. But just have a think about certain things, such as color contrast. So if you have a page or a document, people say, people ask me, what's the best color contrast to make sure that it's accessible as anyone? It's not really about that. What it's about ensuring that there is, you can't really find the perfect color contrast for as many people as possible. But what you can do is you can identify if there's a lack of color contrast. It's really straightforward. It's common sense. All you need to do is, so for instance, if you have blue text on a light blue background, there's not enough contrast there to make it easily visible for someone who might have particular visual impairment or might have other issues when it comes to vision. It's not rocket science, this. It's not rocket science. And people kind of get hepped up on the details in regards to colors, what colors work best, what contrast. It's not really about what works best. It's about just identifying what's not going to work. And that's fairly straightforward. Similar colors together mean that there's less contrast. Less contrast means that there is more difficulty in identifying what's on the page. And that's not just about text either. That's about, are your buttons a different color to the rest of your page? Is anything that's important on your document or on your page, does it stand out visually? And that's, it's an easy win. Like I said, it's an easy win, something that can be fixed lickety-split. as it were. So, have a think about color contrast in your design. Is color the only differential in a design? I'm thinking maybe like a Quiz Pro, a quiz app or something along those lines. Is a difference in color the only thing that makes something different from something else? If that's the case, then there are people out there who are colorblind, who won't be able to differentiate certain images or certain things on your page through color alone. You have to think about shape, or think about another indicator, another differential. So don't just rely on color to make things different on your page, because we have people who are colorblind and won't be able to identify it. Other just quick things to think about when it comes to design: font's always a big one. The sans serif family, it's widely regarded as being the most readable, so anything in there. And then the WCAG guidelines talk about kind of like font size 12 as a starting point. So sans serif, font size 12. Okay, it might not fit kind of like your design expectations, but you know what? If there is a battle between personal preference when it comes to aesthetics and usability, surely you should come down on the side of usability. Because otherwise you're cutting out your audience, or you're cutting out a fairly substantial part of your audience. So that's something to think about in regards to those things. Easy things in the design stage that you can fix. But we're going to go back to PDFs now, because PDFs. Now, it's not a perfect world, and I understand it's not a perfect world. When it comes to higher education, sometimes the only source of text, especially when it comes to things like key texts, are photocopies of pages of textbooks. Now, images of text are rubbish for assistive technology and screen readers and things, because things like screen readers, they don't recognize an image of text as being text itself. It's a different, once again, going back to that labeling thing, it's a different process. It's an image, it's not actual text, or the screen reader won't recognize it as text. So, and it's, to be honest, this kind of stuff should be sorted out at source. But as I say, it's not a perfect world. We're all trying to do your best. So if you have to use images of text, what often happens if the end user needs to use a particular AT with it, is that they can go through a process of conversion of a file, for a PDF, for instance, using something called optical character recognition, which means that you convert image, the program identifies the image as being text and converts it into actual text, which that can be used then by the screen reader. It's not an ideal situation. Really shouldn't have to have an extra step for a disabled user to access the information that you're giving them, but sometimes that is just what happens. So if you have to, and it's not best practice, but if you really have to have a photocopy of a page of a textbook or whatever it is, of course thinking about copyright issues and such, that's probably that's a whole nother show there. If you have those kind of issues, and you're making those photocopies yourself, because unfortunately things like digital repositories still use images of text rather than text itself, which is some repositories used by libraries and HE use images of text, which is ridiculous in regards to accessibility. But if you have to do it and you're creating these things yourself, it's about the clarity of the image when you scan it, put it through the photocopier, that kind of thing. It's about making the image of the text as clear as possible. So if you're photocopying a page of a book, don't, you have to get the book and you're trying to get the page that you need onto the scanning glass, and it's difficult, and you're trying to bend the book around. But if you say, like, if you have half of the previous page on the page that you scan, Screen reader doesn't recognize that what's the most relevant information. It will just simply read the words that are on there. So it's something you have to consider. Make sure that the information that you want to have in your document is the only information that's there. Don't have half a page from somewhere else that's completely irrelevant, that's just popped his head around and said, hello, I'm completely irrelevant. So, but include me anyway, because the technology doesn't identify relevance. It just identifies what the text is after the conversion process. So if you do have to have kind of photocopies, just make sure the images of the pages of text are as clear as possible. So there's a better chance of accurate OCR conversion. And there's a better chance that that material will be able to be accessed. As I say, it's not the ideal situation. It's not the ideal way around. It's a workaround. And, you shouldn't have to rely on workarounds. But it's sometimes the way it is. So that's, these things, these are not things that, they take a little bit of thought, they take a little bit of time and effort. But if you do that in the design stages, then you don't have to firefight, and you don't have to come across, or the people who are using this information, these learning materials, don't come up across this brick wall when they really need to access something that they need to access. With that in mind, and we're talking about access, and we're talking about how do we ensure that this stuff is accessible? How do we ensure that our digital materials, our digital learning schemes, our websites, our pages, the things that we can download, how do we ensure that those are accessible? And you do that through testing. And this is what I was talking about a little earlier on, about conceptualizing and understanding the process that people have to go through to sometimes access the information that you're trying to make available to them. When people think of an end user or a student, it's very easy to be stuck in the mindset of someone who is able-bodied, someone who doesn't have a disability, doesn't have a cognitive issue, doesn't have ADHD, doesn't have color blindness, doesn't have mobility issues, doesn't have the whole range of things that many students and staff have. It's very easy if you are. It's very easy to think of a typical user being very typical, and you got to get away from that kind of thinking. And testing is one of the ways that you can kind of get away from having this kind of this able-bodied, I don't like the term, but normalized version of a user. You have to think outside the box, because users are people, and people are hugely varied and have so many different facets to them. So testing helps with this, and it helps to overcome the lack of knowledge and conceptualization that sometimes many people who have who develop, and we're not just talking educators, we're talking people like web development and so on and so forth. Just the lack of conceptualization of a non-traditional user, as it were. And testing is one. Testing. I feel like I'm trying to get a microphone to work. So when we talk about those things, we don't necessarily mean, but it would be fantastic if the institution that you work for has the money to buy in consultancy, accessibility testers. It's not always the case, but it's great if you can do that. Bespoke accessibility testing gives you a real insight as to the advantages and the disadvantages of the things that you are producing. They can give you knowledge that then can be taken on board by other members of staff. And, having an expert come in and say, this is how somebody does this, or this is how I access this thing, you need to make sure that this is this particular way. It can be priceless for the initial outlay that you might have to give. However, if you haven't got that capacity in your institution, you have to think of other, there's a range of free tools when it comes to accessibility testing out there. There's a range of free tools. You can train staff. You can use a combination of these things. So like a screen reader, you can download NVDA which is a fully functional screen reader for free. It doesn't cost you a penny, and then you can use that in your testing process. Word has its own accessibility checker. It's built in. It's there, ready and waiting to be used. And you can use that to check for documentation that you're going to send out. It's in the review tab, by the way. If you don't already know, it's in the review tab. You press on the accessibility check, and it doesn't just give you where you've gone wrong. It gives you the reasons as to why you've gone wrong, and it references back to accessibility guidelines. Brilliant tool, not just as a way to identify some of the issues you have, but identify and learn about some of the disadvantages that your documentation or your product or whatever it is that you're doing has when it comes to access. And it's free and it's there, and you can use it. It's great. It's amazing. It's already there. AXE is a really good tool for checking accessibility. These tools are readily available, and because they're readily available, I don't think kind of like, we don't really know how to, we don't really know how to go about it. Learn, for goodness sake. Google free accessibility tools. It comes up with a list. You have a process where you're using that. Let staff members take some time to think about how people with disability will access the information that you're putting out there. It's in fact, we talk about inclusivity. We talk about inclusivity in education so much, and that should also be included. Inclusivity. Sorry, that should also be part of your digital offer when it comes to learning materials, whatever that may be. I mean, not only is it kind of the right thing to do, it reaches the wider audience. There's litigation if you don't do it, but it does take some effort. People say, well, it does take effort to find the tools, but the tools are there. So, a quick Google search away. So when people say, I don't really understand it, I say, learn, gosh darn it. Speak to disabled users. Yeah, I mean, your institution may have disabled users, and you could ask them to do some testing for you, but do not ask them just to volunteer. They'll be providing a service, so offer them recompense for that service. It's not for disabled users to sort your problems out. But if you want insight into how disabled people use technology, ask the disabled people who use technology, and if they give you answers, then pay them. It's not this. I can't believe I have to say this, but the amount of times that I've been in HE institutions in particular are really bad for this. Like, we'll let some of our students, some of our disabled students, test this stuff. Let them. They're doing you a favor, dude. You pay them to give you a fantastic service that you may not get any other way. Yeesh. Expecting people to do that kind of thing for free is disrespectful. Disrespectful at best. Disrespectful at best. So testing is incredibly important. You can refer to the guidelines. You can refer to the WCAG guidelines. But also try to couple that with thought about the actual people that use the things that you're going to be creating or you've already created. Make sure you start with the human use rather than just ticking off a list. I've said it before. Compliance does not necessarily equate to usability. So testing is really important. Having people who have to use assistive technology test your product is a great way of doing about it. But if you can't do that, if you can't source that, there's free tools out there. Learn how a screen reader works. Learn how speech to text technology works. Learn how these things that are used work, and learn why they're used as well. That's probably equally important. testing. They're free screen readers, native screen readers. Apple has their own voiceover screen reader. It's built in. It's free. You can use it. Microsoft have their equivalent. You have these things in iPhones and Android phones. They're there. They're ready to be used. Use them for testing. It doesn't take very much at all. Just keep. It means that you can kind of all these things. Just keep tabs on things. And in a very, very awkward segue, speaking of tabs, I mentioned it a little bit before, but if just the classic things when we talk about testing, one of the kind of starting points when it comes to testing is something I call the tab test. Can your page be accessed in a logical fashion? Can all the elements on your page be accessed in a logical fashion, in chronological fashion, purely by keyboard input by pressing a tab? And every time you press a tab, does it go to the place that it's supposed to do? Is it you making sure that you're getting the heading? You're making sure that you're subheading. You're making sure that any buttons there, if they have a drop-down menu, the drop-down menu itself has its own tab function. You start with the simple stuff, and then that gives you an appreciation of what people have to go through to get to the same point that other people who don't have this ability take for granted. That's another another easy win. Can you tab through your page logically? And if not, you got to fix it. It's often the case that you'll tab through to a certain part, press the tab button, you'll get to a certain part, you won't be able to get to the half of the page that has a button on it that means that you have to upload your answers to a test. It's these kind of things. It's these barriers. Let me think about other kind of fairly straightforward, fairly simple things. PDFs again. One of the biggest requests from students who I work with is simple changing of background color. On a Word document, you can do that very easily in the Design tab. You don't have to do anything. You go to the Design tab, and there's background color. There's a specific button for it. You can just press that, change the background color. Wallet, Bob's your uncle, no problem whatsoever. PDF's a little bit more difficult. This is why alternative formatting is really important. HTML, you can change a little bit of code and add a different background color. It's not ideal, and it takes a little bit of knowledge, but it's probably easier to do that than rely on a completely locked down PDF. So that's something to take on board. Adobe has a color change function. Some versions of Adobe have a background color change function, but that only works if like the original PDF has been thought about accessibility wise, and if it's rubbish, it's sometimes quite problematic. Speaking of alternative formatting, one of the reasons that alternative formatting is important is if you have, say you have an information that's formatted to being viewed on a PC, that's not going to be the primary way that many students view, whether they have disabilities or not. It's not going to be the primary way that many of your students are going to use. For instance, a number of students who I work with, visually impaired and blind, they use their smartphone as their primary screen reader now. Not way back when, but until recently, relatively recently, JAWS was the industry leader, and you have to sit down at the computer and PC and use it that way. Now we have students using VoiceOver on their iPhones as their primary screen reader, primary way of accessing information. So you've got to make sure that information can adapt to different machines, so a tablet, mobile phone, PC, which is one of the reasons why alternative formatting is important, because that kind of adaptation for screens doesn't necessarily happen in certain file formats, such as PDFs. EPUB's really good at making sure that something is readable no matter what kind of no matter what kind of technology you're using, as is HTML. Have it as a web page. Just off the top of my head, one of the reasons that's important is if something formatting wise doesn't work extremely well. Things like magnification can be massively problematic. So not only are you disadvantaged by the need to use magnification in the first place, but if you have to magnify something that's not formatted for a particular machine, then you may be cutting out a huge amount of essential information by trying to focus in on one thing. So yeah, that's something to think about. It's not necessarily when you're designing these things, don't necessarily think that it's going to be fairly traditional PC usage. Mobile phones are smaller, lighter, and more adaptable machines, and are often used with people with disabilities as a primary way of accessing information. Excuse me. As I turn the page of my notes here, speaking as a technology bod, I got everything written down on traditional. Actually, no, it's not traditional. It's one of my erasable notepads. I love these things. You can just write and then write and wipe. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I mentioned, can your material be accessed by a range of digital tools and keep formatting integrity? Very important, very important. Simple stuff like using alt text when it comes to images and documentation on web pages. It's another one of those things that people get hung up on. Okay, so we have to provide alt text. How much detail is enough? How much detail is too much detail? There's fairly simple kind of standard things you need to think about when you're providing alt text. Alt text, by the way, is a description of an image on a screen. So in a Word document, if you have a picture, use a screen reader. Alt text, instead of just identifying the picture as a picture, alt text will replace that identification picture with a description of the picture itself. And it's also another one of those easy wins. It's fairly straightforward to add alt text to a document. It's a right click on a Word document, PDF, same sort of thing. When you're building those web pages, once again, same thing. Alt text, easy peasy to find the facility. A little bit more complicated when you're thinking about the detail of how much you need to put in to an image. I'm only speaking from personal experience. There's people have written lots of stuff and have written some really good guidelines about detail when it comes to alt text. How much do you put in? Is the image essential to the understanding of a document, and so on and so forth. Once again, it's a Google away, guys. But general rules, when I'm doing staff training, you've got to let your detail of your description be guided by the importance of the image. It's that simple. So if your image is purely decorational, is that a word? Decorational? Anyway, if your image is just a decoration, and it has no specific link to any information on the page, you don't need to offer a description. You may want to think about why it's on there, to be honest. But each to their own. But if say an image is essential to the understanding of a piece, perhaps off the top of my head, like a GCSE language paper where you have to write a response to an image, the detail has to be extensive, and you just go by that. Okay, you think to yourself, okay, how important is this image? The more important, the more detail that I need. It's very, it's quite. I think about this as being common sense, but people do get nervous about, the kind of limits, or they do want to have these specific guidelines, and there are specific guidelines that exist. But I think sometimes if you just stop and think, and you think, okay, I won't be able to see this image. What information from the image do I need to convey to ensure that there's understanding of this document? That's all it is. And then you go by that. So yeah, and adding alt text is super easy peasy now. It never used to be the case, but it is now. So there's no excuse not to do it at all. Absolutely, there's no excuse not to offer alt text and images, but it's just about how much detail do you offer, and just use your common sense. Use your common sense, have a think, conceptualize somebody who won't be able to see the image, and go from there. So those are some very rapid hints and tips when it comes to this particular subject. I want to, speaking as my cynical self and my historical dipping of toes into the dark side of technology consultancy. Here's a really big tip for you, guys. For the love of all that's holy, check the accessibility claims of third-party products before you buy in. It's going back to that idea that compliance isn't necessarily usability, and if I'm going to be honest, there are companies out there who are a little less than incredibly moral. So, as you would do with anything, check your product. Don't necessarily, and I see this quite a lot, and I don't really understand why. They're like, there's a certain deference to companies that produce learning materials, or technology companies that produce particular apps, particular ways of working, so on and so forth. And there's kind of a deference to, check that stuff. If they've got an accessibility statement, check that that it's true. This is not the case of 99.9% of companies. But business is business. If you're trying to sell a product, then sometimes bold claims filter their way into your sales pitch. You shouldn't buy anything before checking yourself when it comes to accessibility. Some of the wording and some of the accessibility statements. It's like, it works with screen readers. No, it works with one screen reader, or it does this or it does that. Just check. Do your due diligence, guys. Do it before you buy it, Do it before you buy it. Of course, you have to take on faith that you are getting a product that does what it says it does, but still, you got to check, and you got to have and make sure your institution checks. Don't just rely on what somebody says about their product. Accessibility it's a complicated area, and for instance, if you work in an HE institution, you're going to have a wide range, a huge range of students with disability, a huge range of assistive technology used by those students. It's not going to be uniform. That's the other thing as well. It's something I've not touched upon, not in this show anyway, but I have done in the past. Assistive technology use is not uniform. It used to be a very limited number of products. Now it's not. It's not at all. So check the statement, the accessibility statement that the company has. If it doesn't have an accessibility statement, run a mile, because but check the claims that are made of accessibility, and check it in regard to real usage of your students or staff or whoever's going to be using it. This is where the kind of compliance and the checklist thinking is only the start. Does it do this? Does it do that? And you think, oh, great, it covers that. But what does that look like in reality? What does that look like for our disabled students and their use in a university setting or a school setting or a nursery school setting or whatever the setting is? It's not just about compliance. It's about how real people use the product. And that is many and varied in certain institutions because of a huge footfall and the happy diversity that many institutions have. So I know I'm being cynical. Happily, I never worked with companies who had so few scruples as to kind of try and mislead people. But you've got to make sure that you do your own due diligence. And with that in mind, that means that you have to have an awareness of disability. You have to have an awareness of disability if you are going to guarantee accessibility of digital resources, and you should. You should. Sometimes it's surprising how much of a lack of awareness there is, but that goes back to kind of conceptualization of what is a student and so on and so forth, what is a member of staff. So just think a little bit away from, think a little bit away from the traditional. Think about, how are these things accessed by disabled people? How can you make it easier for these things to be accessed by disabled people? And don't think of these as an extra. Don't think of this as this is an essential. It's a baseline. It's such a baseline, in fact, that it's enshrined in law, ladies and gents. So stick and carrot once again, cupcake and baseball bat. I'm perfectly fine using both. But yeah. So as I said at the beginning, digital forms of learning, remote learning, or digital tools are often seen as the solution to accessibility, and in some ways they are, some ways they're not. So you have to put the work in to make digital resources or any kind of digital learning products accessible, and you should be putting that work in. If you're buying something in, that work isn't necessarily the creation of accessible material, but it's checking that the product is itself accessible. And that's that. And if you're not doing that, that lack of foresight, lack of care, that's not inclusive, is it? That's not because you haven't thought about somebody who has to use a screen reader, because you haven't thought about somebody who won't be able to see colours on a page. You haven't thought about somebody who can't read reams and reams and reams and reams of material without suffering a migraine. All these things, all this difference, and that's what it comes down to. It's about catering for difference. And if we can't do that in the educational sphere, for goodness sake, where do you do it? We talk about inclusivity a lot. We talk about it all the time. But true inclusivity needs effort, and it warrants effort. So what does that effort look like? The effort looks like testing, accessibility testing, not just having tools for testing, but having a process of testing. It's about, the effort looks like being able to see non-traditional ways of doing things. The effort looks like not seeing these things as effort, as seeing these things as part and parcel of effective creation when it comes to digital learning materials. And I think if you start from there, it's not effort. It's just basic kind of basic best practice. I always say this as well. It's like I constantly repeat myself in these shows. I think it's something to do with the time of day, but accessible practice is best practice. It's not just for disabled people. It's for people who don't have disabilities, and it benefits everybody. A range of file formats for documents and learning material mean that you're going to cover all your bases, whether people are disabled or not. Being able, having captions and audio transcriptions of audio, means that you're covering all your bases. And why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? As I said before, this stuff is readily available. A lot of it is free. It's free. There's no price point. There's no price point. I find it amazing. The assistive technology in general is very expensive due to the limited market that it's selling to. So the price of products can sometimes be astronomical when it comes to specialist ergonomic material, when it comes to fairly complicated one-off bespoke machinery, and so on and so forth. But not this stuff that I've talked about today. This stuff's free. It's free. Yeah, I'm very tight. I love free things. The transcription and dictation function in Word is free. The accessibility checker is free. For testing, we've got native speech to text, text to speech in pretty much every operating system. Free. I talk about effort, but there's very little effort in sourcing some of this stuff. Very little effort. There's things that should cost money, as I've mentioned before. Hiring disabled users to actually use the products and ensure that the things that you're producing are accessible. We got this thing that I haven't really, perhaps, and I touched on it when I talked about third-party things. It's not necessarily down to people within the institution to who have a choice when it comes to design. That might not be the case, but if you do, ask the questions. Using your online portal. Is this online portal? Can this be used by everybody in our institution? And if not, why not? Why not? In HE. In society in general, we are not talking about a small percentage of people here. We're not. In HE, in my own institution, we're talking about 10 to 12% of the entire student body who either identify as disabled or who have a disability. That's not an unsubstantial amount of people, guys. And like any marginalised group, the lack of visibility often reflects itself in the inaccessibility of digital product. So if you really are, if education really is inclusive, then that should be reflected when it comes to digital learning materials. It has to be because it's the law, but it should be because it's basically just being decent. So I am going to get off my soapbox. I am going to kind of just sum up some of the things. I wrote a load of stuff out for this one because I knew I'd be ranting. I've tried not to focus on PDFs, but I've probably failed terribly on that. I can't. I'll tell you what, speaking personally, sorting chunky PDFs out is a large percentage of my working day. Shouldn't be, but it is. So I hate them. I'm not. This is no fence sitting thing. I can't be doing with PDFs. Do mine up. So when it comes to things like PDFs, try to provide alternative file formats. If you can't, make sure that those PDFs are tagged, the tagging's logical, it's navigatable, it's chunked. Hyperlinks, make sure hyperlinks are not just kind of click here. Make sure that they offer a description of where you're going to be linking to, so the screen orientation is the best it can be. Caption your videos and use transcription for audio, so Stream, YouTube, Word for the Web, Otter, all those things you can use to do that. Use styles in Word, because that means that the tagging thing isn't as much of an issue. Here's one just a little one. If you're doing a bullet point in Word, okay, just put a full stop at the end of the bullet point sentence, because then there'll be a natural pause in the screen reading. Just little things like that, just bits and bobs. I mean, I know about that because it's kind of my job to know about that. But if you start looking into this stuff, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. But anyway, transcription, use styles in Word, be consistent in all your materials. Make sure everything is the same. Make sure it's familiar, okay? Because that familiarity will be extremely useful in regards to navigation, in regards to making sure cognitive load when you are using a particular learning material is not huge. Make sure when you design things, color contrast is important. But there's no secret color contrast that works with everybody. But just don't make sure things stand out against each other, especially if they're essential to the learning. Make sure color's not your only differential. Make sure that's Make sure color's not the only differential within a series of things, because there are people who are colorblind. Sans serif is best bet for font, size 12. Images of text are rubbish. Try not to use them. If you have to use them, make them as clear as possible in PDFs. Have a system for testing. There are free tools out there. Consultants are good, but if you're going to use people with disability to test your products, make sure that they are appropriately recompensed for their time and effort. A little trick for ensuring that maybe your page is navigatable by the keyboard is the tapping. You just make sure that everything that you need to be able to access can be accessed by pressing tab in a logical fashion. Background color. You can change the background color in a Word document very easily through the Design tab. Offer alternative formats to files. Can your digital offer, whatever that may be, can it be accessed and easily read on a range of machines? Don't be too laptop PC focused. Alt texture images, guys. There's no excuse not to alt texture images nowadays. There isn't, and the description should be reliant upon the importance of the image within the learning material. And check accessibility claims. And that's it, ladies and gents. That's it. That's all I got. This is my job, and I am one of those fantastically lucky and annoying people who absolutely love their job. I make no bones about it. I find it fascinating. The people I work with are brilliant. The students I work with are brilliant. The staff that I work with are brilliant. I find the technology fascinating. I find the ways of working fascinating. But you have to put the effort in. Ensure that your digital learning materials are accessible, not just because of the stick, but also because it's just the thing that you should be doing in general. Right then, thank you very much, ladies and gents. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day or night or wherever you are, and I will hopefully be speaking to you all again soon.